dreaming of becoming someone more. The nobles glanced at him with displeasure. The red-haired woman looked at the young man intently and asked him to tell her. The boy closed his eyes and noted that it was indeed reasonable to believe that such a small man only wanted lands or titles. Alicia looked at him with interest and said that she would listen and judge him. She wondered if the boy wanted a government position in the kingdom or an increase in the construction fee. Whatever it was, the woman wanted to keep him near her. The boy bowed his head and said that he dreamed of the Royal Academy being cleaned out. The queen frowned and asked for more details. The hero reported that absurd, unreasonable, and terrible things were happening in the College of the Royal Academy Magenta. Students were divided by influence rather than by knowledge, which affected the physical and psychological health of the lower-level students. The teachers of the academy preferred not to notice this, just as they ignored the fact that the money was going into someone else's pockets. The brown-haired man closed his eyes and said that it was time to remind the students that their revelry in power, their erection of a class wall for the supposed aspirations of peace, was too different from the main goals of the educational institution. The ruler looked at her subject carefully. The officials looked at the young man in shock. Some were surprised, while others were obviously nervous and sweating. The hero asked Xavier to get evidence. The knight presented the queen with a scroll. Lloyd said that he and the guard had been investigating for the past 4 months. Academy graduates, a handyman, and even a conscientious professor who was fed up with such a system and eventually quit. They all told him everything in detail. The frightened officials turned to the queen and exclaimed that this was all a lie of a low person. Alicia looked at them menacingly and declared that all those who dared to speak now would be subject to a confession spell. The magicians surrounded the men and activated the check. After a while, these officials also began to decorate the pillars on the street. The academy was being cleaned up under the personal supervision of the queen. The woman commanded the guards, ordering them not to miss anyone and not to make any exceptions for those who were familiar with them or somehow connected. She frowned and shouted that, depending on the nature of the crime, they could fire, take away lands, and even execute. Screams and pleas for mercy were heard. The protagonist and his knight watched what was happening from the hill. The young man's face was distorted by a satisfied grin or a devilish grin, something in between. The swordsman looked at him and noted that the gentleman was glad that the academy had been cleaned up. Lloyd grinned and explained that the queen had completely forgotten about his existence. All he had to do was slip away unnoticed and live in chocolate. The knight asked him not to make such a face, even if he was in a good mood. Kale appeared behind the guy and said that there was a message from Her Highness. The knight relayed the queen's request to attend the banquet tomorrow night. The hero turned around and hesitantly agreed. The man looked at him and relayed the queen's words. It was a great idea to use the academy as a ploy to get out from under her nose. She respected his desire to play. Lloyd turned pale and thought that he was in the queen's palm. The knight turned and left. The hero watched him go and muttered that he was scared. He looked at Xavier and asked if he couldn't see the man approaching. The knight shook his head and replied that Lord Kale was the best swordsman in the kingdom. It would be very easy for him to hide his tracks from a knight of Xavier's caliber. The important guests' rooms. Julian looked at his brother in surprise and asked if he knew this would happen, which is why he allowed himself to beat Diego so badly. The hero leaned back on the back of the sofa and muttered that it wasn't that bad. He closed his eyes and said that a simple builder who received a royal order did an excellent job. They were going to reward him, so the boy wanted to deal with the academy. He had faith, justice was on his side. He knew that everything would work out. The boy looked down thoughtfully, then looked up when the interlocutor called him a punk. The student turned to his brother. The brown-haired man looked at him questioningly and asked what the punks wanted. Julian smiled and asked him not to use the word punk anymore because he was his older brother, who he could rely on, and of whom he was more proud than anyone else. The hero's eyes widened in surprise. Notification: Julian Frontera thinks of you as a hero who appeared in a time of crisis. He opened his heart to you, respects and acknowledges you. Kinship with Julian has increased by 65 points. You have earned 910 RP as a bonus. RP amount 3929. There was a pause. Lloyd grimaced and said that he was going to throw up from these words. The boy turned away and muttered that he really regretted saying that. Music was playing in the hall, and the elegant guests were chatting noisily. The queen took a glass and asked Lloyd to come to her. The hero, trying to hide behind his collar, was sweating. The woman looked at him and noted that this made him even more conspicuous because he looked like a mole cricket. The guy smiled tensely and muttered that everything was wrong. Xavier bowed and admired the ruler's farsightedness. They agreed with the queen that in front of them was a real mole cricket. The brown-haired man glanced sideways at the knight, indignant that he was so pleased. Alicia narrowed her eyes and asked if the aristocrat had not heard when she asked him to come closer. The hero quickly came up and apologized. There was a pause. The woman asked him to come closer, and the guy took a step, then another and another. The redhead approached the sweaty young man and asked him to come even closer. Their faces almost touched. Lloyd muttered that he dared not come any closer to her ladyship. The woman leaned forward and quietly told him in his ear that the guy should come to her as soon as he changed his mind. She could give him everything. Alicia passed by and added that this banquet was in his honor. The hero clenched his fist and thought that it was in the bag. Of course, it was best to live doing nothing. But what if a natural disaster happened or there were problems with the estate? The brown-haired man raised his hands and smiled, deciding that he would work and earn a living. Then he would have a luxurious pension. He pounced on the food and thought that he could not wait to get started. He was paid for the work, and now he could just have fun. The knight looked at his master with a sigh. Lloyd froze and remembered that in 3 years the story of the blackening of the queen would happen. By that time he would have both a pension and an estate. 2 men passed behind the hero and said the phrase, "The banquet will last until the moon begins to wane." The young man realized that he knew this phrase. This is the moment when the queen was poisoned and she lost her arm. A secret code that her killers shared. This phrase was supposed to sound in 3 years, and not now. Lloyd turned around and wondered why it was said by Mr. Kale. The queen leaned back on the sofa. She put her hand on her forehead and wondered if she had drunk too much. It seemed to her that everything was as usual. Alicia stood up and thought that the last few days had been oversaturated with events, the academy, eliminating the consequences of the flood. She frowned and thought that there were more encroachments from the enemy country of Isfahan. She remembered Samark, an ally in Chad, and thought that he was gathering an army in the western part of Isfahan, according to spies too many for simple exercises. The queen wondered if this could be an invasion. If they were planning an invasion, they would be massing their troops at the northern borders. Attacking through the endless wasteland would be akin to suicide. The woman closed her eyes and wondered what the hell they were planning. She grabbed her head. Alicia frowned and thought it was strange. Wouldn't the mana have absorbed so much alcohol in her blood already? The queen grabbed her heart and thought she couldn't control her heartbeat. Her breathing was labored. She thought she could neutralize this rotation of mana. Her heart was beating hard. Alicia folded in half. She opened her eyes and thought it was poison. How was that possible? She carefully checked all the food. The woman stood up. She held her heart and screamed that she needed to go outside, to the street where there was no one. Her gaze swam. She was for help. Suddenly the doors opened. Alicia looked forward in shock. Lord Kale stood in front of her. The queen extended her hand and said that she was glad that he was there at the most difficult moment and asked to give her her hand. The man looked at her and said that he was really glad that he was here on time. He took out the sword and said that he would help her fall asleep forever. Alicia opened her eyes in shock. Lloyd went ahead and said that they needed to go. They were in trouble. The guys walked down the corridor. The brunette frowned and asked if he would ask what happened. Xavier replied that he also felt a strange mana energy and asked what he should do. The hero frowned and said that he had to defeat the sword master. The blue-haired man went ahead and asked, "Is this really such a joke? It is very inopportune." He replied that he needed him to stall for time. The knight ran forward. He grabbed the candelabra. They ran forward. Xavier said that he could hold out for 3 minutes. The hero replied that that was enough. The boys turned the corner. They saw the dead men. Kale swung his sword. Alicia blocked his blow. The man looked at her and said that even in such a state she blocked the blow 3 times. It was great. The woman asked why he was doing that. He hit her in the stomach. The man swung his sword. His eyes widened. Xavier hit him on the shoulder. Kale turned around. He attacked the guy. The man frowned and thought, how could he block his blow with a candlestick? Who does he think he is? The knight's eyes flashed. He summoned a blow with a higher vibration. Kale looked at him in shock. Xavier pushed him away. The man thought, what was that? This is a very unusual way of mana. The youth swung the candlestick. He struck one blow after another. Lloyd ran to the queen and asked if she was okay. Alicia looked at him in shock and asked how he knew. The guy covered her mouth and said that they would talk later. He put his hand on her stomach and thought that he would use the Azrahan method now. The hero began to absorb mana. Xavier struck the man. Kale's sword caught fire. The knight gritted his teeth and thought that this was the Aura sword. Only a master could create such a sword once he finished the end of everything. He threw a candelabra at him. Kale parried his blow. The blue-haired man jumped for the weapon. He caught the candelabra in the air and swung to strike. The man frowned and thought that he had to admit that this young man was a genius in mana management and his skills. He struck him in the stomach and thought that, however, he lacked practical experience. Kale swung the sword. Xavier managed to jump back. The guy was falling. Lloyd gritted his teeth. He narrowed his eyes and thought that he was counting on him. If he lost, then they were all finished. Kale smiled. Xavier was falling and thought that the blow was a blank, but he still managed to wound. The man braced himself and thought that this was his best chance to attack. The guy rushed to meet him. Kale swung his sword and thought, is he really coming? Has he completely lost his fear? Xavier dodged his blow. He called Pipadong. The hamster grabbed the sword and threw it towards him. The man naturally bit his teeth. The knight pulled the sword out of its sheath. Kale ran to attack. Xavier pursed his lips. He rushed forward with a tearing blow. The man gritted his teeth. He flew back. Kale broke through the doors. He frowned and thought, is he really using a sword like a cannon? This is some kind of nonsense. A stream of fire flew towards him. The man dodged. Xavier swung his sword at him. The guy attacked him again with an explosion. Explosions occurred throughout the corridor. Kale thought what a monster he was. Lloyd gritted his teeth. He was healing the queen. She looked up at him and wondered how that was even possible. She thought he was absorbing her mana, not just hers, he was absorbing her poisoned mana. Lloyd continued to heal her and told her not to talk to him or he wouldn't be able to concentrate. Alicia frowned and asked how he dared yell at her. He replied that it couldn't be, maybe she had hearing problems because of the poison. She replied that she didn't think so. He apologized and told her to be lenient with him. The guy coughed up blood. The woman pursed her lips and wondered what he was doing. The brunette gritted his teeth. She thought, was he really willing to save her even if it killed him? Kale crashed into the door. A stream of fire flew towards him. In general, an explosion occurred in the hall. The man landed on one knee. Xavier was following him. He frowned and thought that he would never get out of here. Kale frowned and thought that he would only waste time trying to get rid of him. He smiled and thought that he was a fool. The man extended his hand to the side and asked for the guard's attention. He said that this man along with his henchmen dared to attack Her Majesty. They should raise their arms to protect the queen. The guards pointed their weapons at Xavier. They ran to attack him. The knight prepared to fight back. He gritted his teeth. The guards scattered one after another. The blue-haired man held the sword and looked at them. He swung the sword. Kale frowned and thought that he had thrown back 3 elite warriors with just one blow. In all of history, he had never heard of a man with such skills. If he reached the level of a sword master, he would be able to wield a power that would be able to easily destroy a small country. Xavier looked ahead with anger. Kale thought that this would never happen. He took out his sword, ordered the guards to disperse and said that he would use it against him. The knight gritted his teeth and thought that it was an aura sword. The man was advancing on him. He swung his sword. The guy looked at him in shock. He moved his foot to the side. The glow of the ball blinded him. Xavier was thrown back several corridors. He was being knocked off his feet by the purple glow. Kale followed him. The knight was lying unconscious on the ground. The man was approaching him. Xavier gritted his teeth and thought that the absorption of the poison was complete. He stood up. The queen called him. The guy spewed out black liquid from himself. Alicia frowned and said that if he sat quietly like that, he would die. She looked at him and told him to concentrate all his mana in one hand. The guy gritted his teeth and thought that she was right. She needed to cut off her arm. That's exactly what she did to herself in the novel. There would be no damage from losing one arm. The only thing is that it would be awkward to swing a shovel. He grabbed the knife and extended it forward. Lloyd screamed a tearing blow. A glow appeared around the knife. It erupted a stream of energy. It broke through the roof of the building. Kale looked to the side. He frowned and thought, what was that? It looked like a powerful release of mana. What did this Lloyd do? The man turned his gaze to Xavier. He stood up unsteadily. The blonde frowned and thought how he managed to get up after a direct collision with his aura sword. Xavier looked at him and thought that he made an oath. The sword in his hands reflected. The guy extended it forward and